Have you ever lost yourself so completely in someone else's needs that you forgot who you were? That feeling where your entire emotional state depends on whether your partner, parent, or friend is happy, where saying no feels impossible, and where your own dreams have faded into the background of someone else's life story? This is the reality of codependency, a pattern of relating that affects millions of people, often without them even realizing it. It's not just about being caring or supportive. Codependency is what happens when our natural human capacity for connection and empathy becomes distorted into something that ultimately harms both ourselves and those we claim to help. Welcome to Strides to Solutions with Esther Adams, where we explore the psychological challenges that shape our lives and discover practical pathways toward healing and growth. I'm your host, Esther Adams, and today we're diving deep into a topic that affects millions of people, often without them even realizing it: codependency. Over the next hour, we'll unravel what codependency really means, how it develops, and most importantly, how you can break free from its grip to build healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Whether you're struggling with these patterns yourself or supporting someone who is, this conversation will provide insights, tools, and hope for transformation. The term codependency might sound clinical, maybe even a bit cold, but the experience itself is anything but detached. It's intensely personal, often painful, and surprisingly common. Originally coined in the 1950s by Alcoholics Anonymous to describe the wives who enabled their alcoholic husbands, the concept has evolved far beyond its roots in addiction recovery. Today, we understand codependency as a complex pattern of behaviors, thoughts, and emotions that can develop in any relationship, whether romantic, familial, or even professional. It's the invisible thread that keeps us tethered to unhealthy dynamics, the voice that tells us we're only valuable when we're needed, and the fear that whispers we'll be abandoned if we dare to prioritize ourselves. What makes codependency particularly insidious is how it masquerades as love, care, and dedication. After all, isn't it good to be selfless, to put others first, to be the person everyone can count on? Society often celebrates these qualities, especially in certain roles: the devoted spouse, the sacrificing parent, the always available friend. But there's a crucial difference between healthy caring and codependent caretaking, between genuine love and anxious attachment, between supporting someone and losing yourself in their struggles. Understanding this difference isn't just academic, it's the key to reclaiming your life and building relationships that nurture rather than deplete you. The journey through codependency is like navigating a maze where the walls keep shifting. Just when you think you've found the exit, maybe you've finally set a boundary or taken time for yourself. Guilt crashes over you like a wave, pulling you back into familiar patterns. You might recognize the problem intellectually, read all the right books, even go to therapy, but still find yourself stuck in the same cycles. This isn't because you're weak or broken. It's because codependency isn't just a bad habit you can simply decide to break. It's a deeply ingrained way of relating to the world, often developed in childhood as a survival strategy, maintained by powerful emotional and psychological forces that operate largely outside our conscious awareness. Consider Sarah, whose story echoes countless others. She grew up with a mother who struggled with depression and a father who worked constantly to avoid the tension at home. From age 8, Sarah learned to read her mother's moods like a weather forecast, adjusting her behavior to prevent storms. She became the family's emotional barometer, the one who kept everyone stable, who never caused problems, who always knew what others needed before they asked. These skills served her well as a child. They kept her safe, earned her praise, gave her a sense of purpose in a chaotic household. But fast forward 20 years, and Sarah finds herself exhausted, anxious, and mysteriously empty, despite a life that looks successful from the outside. She can't maintain a romantic relationship without becoming consumed by it, can't say no to anyone's requests without feeling crushing guilt, and has no idea what she actually wants from life because she's never had the mental space to consider it. Sarah's experience illustrates a fundamental truth about codependency. It's not a character flaw or a personality trait you're born with. It's a learned pattern of behavior, a coping mechanism that once served a purpose but has outlived its usefulness. The child who learned to anticipate and manage a parent's emotions to maintain safety becomes the adult who compulsively manages everyone's feelings at the expense of their own well being. The teenager who found identity and worth in being needed becomes the adult who panics at the thought of not being essential to someone. The person who learned early that love was conditional and required constant effort becomes someone who can never rest, never feel secure, never believe they're enough just as they are. The roots of codependency often trace back to our earliest experiences of attachment and love. When children grow up in environments where emotional needs aren't consistently met, where boundaries are either non existent or rigid, where they're required to be emotional caretakers rather than children, they develop strategies to cope. These strategies, hypervigilance to others' moods, suppression of their own needs, taking responsibility for others' emotions, become so automatic that they feel like personality traits rather than learned behaviors. The child doesn't consciously decide to become codependent. They simply do what they need to do to survive and be loved in their particular family system. Family dynamics play a crucial role in the development of codependent patterns. In families where addiction, mental illness, abuse, or chronic dysfunction exist, children often take on roles that help maintain some semblance of stability. They might become the family hero who excels at everything to distract from problems, the scapegoat who acts out and becomes the identified problem, the lost child who disappears into the background, or the mascot who uses humor to diffuse tension. Each of these roles involves some degree of self abandonment, some compromise of authentic self expression in service of family stability. The child learns that their value comes not from who they are, but from what role they play, what function they serve in the family system. But codependency doesn't require dramatic trauma or obvious dysfunction to develop. Sometimes it emerges from more subtle dynamics, a parent who's emotionally unavailable, who has their own unresolved codependency issues, who loves conditionally based on achievement or compliance. A child might learn that mommy is happier when they're perfect, that daddy pays attention when they're helpful, that love feels more secure when they're indispensable. These lessons, absorbed before we have words to describe them, shape our fundamental beliefs about relationships, worthiness, and love. The impact of emotional neglect, even when unintentional, can be particularly significant in developing codependent patterns. When a child's emotional needs are consistently overlooked, minimized, or dismissed, they learn that their feelings don't matter, that they're too much or not enough, that they need to manage everything internally without support. This creates a peculiar kind of wound, not from what was done, but from what wasn't done, not from presence, but from absence. The child grows up feeling fundamentally unseen, unheard, unvalued for who they truly are. They learn to focus on others, partly because it's less painful than acknowledging their own unmet needs, partly because they're still hoping that if they just give enough, help enough, sacrifice enough, they'll finally receive the love and validation they've always craved. Attachment theory provides a useful framework for understanding how early relationships shape our adult patterns of connection. Children who develop secure attachment, who experience consistent, responsive, attuned caregiving, generally grow up with the ability to form healthy, balanced relationships. They can be close without losing themselves, independent without feeling abandoned, supportive without becoming enmeshed. But those who develop anxious attachment often struggle with codependent patterns as adults. Having learned that love is unpredictable, that they need to work constantly to maintain connection, they become hypervigilant to relationship threats, desperate for reassurance, willing to sacrifice anything to avoid abandonment. The anxiously attached child who becomes a codependent adult often operates from a place of profound fear. Every relationship feels like it could end at any moment. Every conflict feels catastrophic. Every need they express feels like a potential deal breaker. They've learned to read micro expressions, to anticipate needs, to shapeshift into whatever others need them to be. It's exhausting, but it feels safer than being authentic and risking rejection. They might consciously know that healthy relationships can withstand disagreement, that love doesn't require perfection, that it's okay to have needs, but their nervous system, shaped by early experiences, continues to sound alarm bells whenever they consider acting on this knowledge. Those with avoidant attachment patterns might seem like they'd be immune to codependency, but they often find themselves in codependent dynamics from the other side. They might partner with someone who's anxiously attached and codependent, creating a push pull dynamic that reinforces both partners' unhealthy patterns. Or they might express codependency differently through controlling behavior, through being the needed one rather than the needy one, through maintaining relationships where they're indispensable but emotionally distant. The avoidantly attached person might not look classically codependent, but they're still organizing their relationships around managing distance and control rather than genuine intimacy and mutual support. Understanding how trauma contributes to codependency helps explain why it's so hard to change these patterns through willpower alone. When a child experiences trauma, whether it's dramatic abuse or subtle emotional neglect, their developing brain adapts to survive in that environment. The regions responsible for threat detection become hyperactive, while those responsible for emotional regulation and self soothing may be underdeveloped. The child's nervous system becomes wired for survival rather than connection, for hypervigilance rather than relaxation, for external focus rather than internal awareness. This neurobiological impact of trauma means that codependent behaviors aren't just psychological habits, they're deeply embedded in our physiological responses. When someone with codependent patterns considers setting a boundary, their body might respond as if they're in actual danger. Heart racing, palms sweating, stomach churning. When they think about prioritizing their own needs, they might feel a wave of such intense guilt and anxiety that it feels unbearable. These aren't just thoughts or feelings. They're whole body experiences rooted in a nervous system that learned early that self focus equals danger and other focus equals safety. The connection between childhood emotional neglect and adult codependency is particularly poignant. Children who grow up without adequate emotional attunement and validation often develop what some therapists call a shape-shifting self, an identity that morphs based on what others need or want. Without a solid sense of their own preferences, feelings, and boundaries, they become emotional chameleons, taking on the colors of whoever they're with. They might find themselves liking different music with different friends, holding different opinions with different partners, essentially becoming different people in different relationships. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's an unconscious survival strategy developed by a child who learned that being themselves wasn't safe or valuable. The learned behaviors and coping mechanisms that characterize codependency become so automatic that they feel like facts of nature rather than changeable patterns. People pleasing isn't just something you do, it feels like who you are. The compulsive need to help, fix, and rescue others doesn't feel like a choice, it feels like a moral imperative. The inability to tolerate others' distress without immediately trying to solve it doesn't feel like a boundary issue. It feels like basic human decency. This is why intellectual understanding alone rarely changes codependent patterns. They're not operating at the level of conscious thought, but at the level of core beliefs and automatic responses. The role of boundaries in codependency deserves special attention because boundaries are both the problem and the solution. Children who grow up in families with poor boundaries, either too rigid or too permeable, don't develop a healthy sense of where they end and others begin. They might experience emotions that aren't theirs as if they were their own, take responsibility for problems that aren't theirs to solve, feel guilty for things that aren't their fault. Learning to establish and maintain boundaries as an adult isn't just about learning to say no. It's about developing a fundamental sense of self as separate from others, worthy of protection and respect. The boundary difficulties in codependency go beyond just having trouble saying no. They involve a fundamental confusion about responsibility: what's mine to handle, what's yours, what's ours together. The codependent person often takes responsibility for others' emotions, choices, and consequences, while struggling to take responsibility for their own life and happiness. They might spend hours trying to manage someone else's anxiety while ignoring their own, or exhaust themselves trying to prevent someone else's poor choices while feeling powerless to make positive choices for themselves. When we look at codependency in the context of specific relationships, patterns become even clearer. In romantic partnerships, codependency often manifests as an all consuming focus on the other person. Your mood depends entirely on their mood. Your plans revolve around their needs. Your identity becomes subsumed in the relationship. You might find yourself constantly scanning for signs of displeasure, apologizing reflexively, agreeing to things you don't want to do. Sex might become another arena for people pleasing rather than mutual pleasure. Conflict feels terrifying because it threatens the connection you depend on for your sense of self. The codependent person in a romantic relationship often operates from a scarcity mindset about love. They believe, consciously or unconsciously, that love is rare, conditional, and easily lost. This creates a dynamic where they're willing to tolerate almost anything: disrespect, neglect, even abuse, rather than risk being alone. They might make excuses for their partner's behavior, minimize their own needs, convince themselves that things will get better if they just try harder, love more, give more. The relationship becomes less about mutual growth and support, and more about the codependent person's desperate attempt to earn and maintain love through self sacrifice. The distinction between empathy and enabling becomes crucial in understanding codependent relationships. Empathy involves understanding and validating someone's feelings while maintaining your own boundaries and allowing them to experience the consequences of their choices. Enabling involves protecting someone from those consequences, solving their problems for them, making their struggles your own. The codependent person often believes they're being empathetic and supportive when they're actually enabling dysfunction and preventing growth, both their own and their partner's. This dynamic becomes particularly destructive when codependency intersects with addiction. The codependent partner of someone struggling with addiction might believe they're helping by covering up consequences, making excuses, taking on extra responsibilities. They might think, if I just love them enough, if I just support them enough, they'll get better. But this enabling actually makes recovery less likely by shielding the addicted person from the natural consequences that might motivate change. Meanwhile, the codependent person becomes increasingly consumed by the other person's addiction, losing themselves in the futile attempt to control something that's ultimately uncontrollable. The relationship between codependency and narcissistic partnerships deserves particular attention because these two patterns often find each other with magnetic precision. The narcissistic person's need for admiration and attention perfectly matches the codependent person's need to be needed. The codependent person's willingness to sacrifice their own needs aligns perfectly with the narcissist's expectation that their needs should be prioritized. It's a destructive dance where both partners' unhealthy patterns are reinforced rather than challenged. In these relationships, the codependent person might spend years trying to earn love and approval that will never come, at least not in any consistent or healthy way. They might convince themselves that if they just understand the narcissist's wounds deeply enough, love them perfectly enough, heal them completely enough, the relationship will transform. This fantasy keeps them trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, always believing that the next sacrifice, the next accommodation, the next suppression of their own needs will be the one that finally makes the difference. The communication patterns in codependent relationships reveal how these dynamics maintain themselves. Instead of direct, honest communication about needs and boundaries, there's often a complex dance of hints, assumptions, and unspoken expectations. The codependent person might never directly state their needs, but then feel resentful when they're not met. They might say yes when they mean no, then feel angry about being taken advantage of. They might use passive aggressive behavior to express feelings they can't voice directly, or manipulate situations to get needs met without having to acknowledge having needs at all. This indirect communication style develops partly from fear of conflict, fear of abandonment, fear of being seen as needy or difficult, but it also comes from a fundamental discomfort with having needs at all. Many codependent people grew up learning that having needs was burdensome, shameful, or dangerous. They learned to present themselves as needless, wantless, endlessly giving. Acknowledging needs as an adult feels like breaking a fundamental rule, like becoming the kind of person they learned was unlovable. The controlling behaviors that often accompany codependency might seem contradictory. How can someone be both self sacrificing and controlling? But controlling codependency isn't about domination, it's about anxiety management. The codependent person tries to control outcomes, emotions, and behaviors because uncertainty feels unbearable. If they can just manage everything perfectly, keep everyone happy, prevent all problems, maybe they can finally feel safe. This illusion of control provides temporary relief from anxiety, but ultimately increases it as the codependent person takes on responsibility for things that are fundamentally beyond their control. Recovery from codependency begins with a shift that sounds simple but feels revolutionary, recognizing that you matter. Your feelings matter, your needs matter, your dreams and desires and boundaries matter. This isn't selfishness, it's the foundation of healthy relationships. You cannot give what you don't have, and you cannot sustain genuine love and support for others when you're depleted, resentful, and lost. The airplane oxygen mask metaphor is overused but apt. You really do need to secure your own mask before helping others, not because others don't matter, but because you can't help anyone if you're unconscious. Self awareness becomes the cornerstone of recovery, but it's a particular kind of awareness compassionate, curious, non judgmental. Many codependent people are harshly self critical, constantly monitoring themselves for flaws and failures. Recovery involves developing a different quality of attention, one that observes patterns without immediately trying to fix them, that notices feelings without immediately judging them as good or bad, right or wrong. This kind of mindful awareness creates space between stimulus and response, between feeling and action, between old patterns and new possibilities. The journey of recovering from codependency often involves grief, profound, unexpected, sometimes overwhelming grief. There's grief for the childhood you didn't have, for the needs that weren't met, for the authentic self that got buried under layers of adaptation and survival. There's grief for the relationships that were organized around codependency that might not survive your recovery. There's grief for the fantasy that if you just tried hard enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, you could earn the love and security you've always craved. This grief isn't a detour from recovery, it's an essential part of it. You can't build something new without mourning what was lost or what never was. Healing childhood wounds isn't about blaming parents or wallowing in past pain. It's about understanding how past experiences shaped present patterns and consciously choosing different responses. It might involve recognizing that the parent you've been trying to please your whole life was themselves a wounded child doing their best with limited resources. It might mean accepting that the love you didn't receive wasn't withheld maliciously but simply wasn't available from people who didn't have it to give. This doesn't minimize the impact of childhood experiences, but it can free you from the futile attempt to get from others what they cannot provide. Self care in recovery from codependency is both a practical strategy and a radical act. For someone who's organized their entire life around others' needs, Taking a bath, reading a book, or spending time on a hobby can feel selfish, even wrong. The codependent person might find themselves literally unable to relax, constantly thinking about what others need, what they should be doing, who might be upset with them for taking this time. Learning to tolerate these feelings without immediately abandoning self care is part of the recovery process. It's practice in believing that your well being matters even when your nervous system is screaming that it doesn't. Self compassion becomes essential because recovery from codependency is messy, nonlinear, and often frustrating. You'll set a boundary, then immediately break it. Recognize a pattern, then repeat it anyway. Make progress, then slide backward during times of stress. The harsh inner critic that many codependent people carry will want to use these failures as evidence that you're hopeless, that change is impossible, that you might as well give up. Self compassion offers a different narrative. You're human, change is hard, every small step matters, and beating yourself up has never actually helped anyone change. The practice of mindfulness offers a powerful tool for interrupting automatic codependent responses. When you notice the familiar pull to rescue, fix, or manage someone else's emotions, mindfulness creates a pause. In that pause, you can ask yourself, is this my responsibility? What am I afraid will happen if I don't intervene? What would it be like to allow this person to handle their own feelings? Mindfulness doesn't immediately change the patterns, but it makes them visible, and what's visible becomes changeable. Emotional regulation skills become crucial because so much of codependency is driven by overwhelming emotions that feel unbearable. The guilt of saying no, the anxiety of allowing others to struggle, the fear of abandonment. These emotions can feel so intense that any action that might reduce them seems justified. Learning to tolerate difficult emotions without immediately trying to escape them through codependent behaviors is like building a new muscle. It's uncomfortable at first, maybe even painful, but with practice, it becomes stronger. Building self esteem in recovery involves fundamentally rewiring your sense of worth. Instead of deriving value from being needed, helpful, or essential to others, you begin to recognize inherent worth that exists regardless of what you do or provide. This might involve reconnecting with interests and talents that have nothing to do with caretaking, spending time with people who value you for who you are rather than what you do for them, or simply practicing the radical act of existing without constantly justifying your existence through service to others. The process of setting and maintaining boundaries in recovery can feel like learning a new language. For someone who's never had clear boundaries, figuring out what boundaries even are, much less how to implement them, can be overwhelming. Boundaries aren't walls, they're more like gates that you can open or close, depending on what feels safe and appropriate. They're not about punishing others or being mean, they're about taking responsibility for your own well being and allowing others to take responsibility for theirs. Learning to set boundaries often starts with small, low stakes situations. Maybe you practice saying no to a request to stay late at work or declining an invitation you don't really want to accept. These might seem like tiny, insignificant acts, but for someone recovering from codependency, they're revolutionary. Each small boundary is evidence that you can prioritize yourself and survive, that others can be disappointed without catastrophe occurring, that you have the right to make choices based on your own needs and preferences. The guilt that accompanies boundary setting in early recovery can be intense. Your nervous system, wired through years or decades of codependent patterns, might interpret boundaries as danger. You might experience physical symptoms, racing heart, sweating, nausea, when you consider or implement a boundary. This is normal, even expected. Your body is responding to what it perceives as a threat to connection and survival. With time and practice, your nervous system learns that boundaries actually increase safety rather than threatening it. But this rewiring takes patience and persistence. Support groups can provide invaluable assistance in recovery from codependency. There's something profoundly healing about sitting in a room, virtual or physical, with others who understand the struggle, who don't judge you for caring too much or struggling to care for yourself, who can share their own journey and hold hope when yours falters. Groups like Codependence, Anonymous, Al Anon, or therapy groups specifically for codependency provide not just support, but also modeling. You get to see others in various stages of recovery, learning that change is possible. Professional therapy often becomes necessary for deep recovery from codependency, particularly when it's rooted in trauma or accompanied by depression, anxiety, or other mental health challenges. A skilled therapist can help you understand the origins of your codependent patterns, process the emotions that arise in recovery, and develop new ways of relating to yourself and others. They can provide the consistent, boundaried relationship that many codependent people have never experienced, one where you're valued for who you are, not what you provide, where your feelings and needs matter, where growth is supported but not demanded. Different therapeutic approaches offer various benefits for codependency recovery. Cognitive behavioral therapy can help identify and change the thoughts that drive codependent behaviors. Psychodynamic therapy can explore the childhood origins of these patterns and how they play out in current relationships. Dialectical behavior therapy can provide concrete skills for emotional regulation and distress tolerance. Family systems therapy can help understand how codependent patterns operate within family dynamics and how to change your role in the system. The process of creating a personalized recovery plan involves honest assessment of your particular patterns and challenges. What specific codependent behaviors do you engage in? What triggers these behaviors? What emotions drive them? What would your life look like without codependency? Having clear, specific goals, not just stop being codependent, but practice saying no once a week or spend 1 hour weekly on a personal hobby, makes recovery concrete and measurable. Recovery also involves recognizing and celebrating progress, even when it feels small or insufficient. The codependent tendency toward perfectionism and self criticism can make it hard to acknowledge growth. You might set a boundary successfully 9 times, then focus entirely on the 10th time when you didn't. Learning to recognize and celebrate small victories, the time you didn't immediately offer to help, the moment you recognized a codependent thought without acting on it, the day you prioritized your own needs, builds momentum and hope. As recovery progresses, the focus shifts from just stopping codependent behaviors to building a life of genuine fulfillment and healthy relationships. This involves rediscovering, or perhaps discovering for the first time, who you are when you're not organizing yourself around others' needs. What do you actually like? What are your values, your dreams, your preferences? These questions might feel impossible to answer at first. You might literally not know what kind of food you prefer or what you like to do for fun. This isn't failure. It's a natural result of years or decades of external focus. Rediscovering personal passions and interests often starts with experimentation and patience. You might try different activities, hobbies, or experiences, paying attention to what genuinely engages you versus what you think you should enjoy. You might return to interests from childhood before codependency took hold, or explore entirely new territories. The goal isn't to immediately find your life's passion, but to practice tuning into your own preferences and desires, learning to value them as legitimate and important. Setting life goals in recovery involves envisioning a future that's truly yours, not one organized around others' needs or expectations. This might mean career changes, relationship changes, lifestyle changes that would have been unthinkable when codependency was running the show. It's about asking not what do others need from me or what would make others happy, but what kind of life would feel meaningful and fulfilling to me. The answers might surprise you, might scare you, might excite you. All of these responses are valid and worth exploring. The concept of healthy interdependence offers an alternative to both codependency and complete independence. Interdependence recognizes that humans are inherently social, that we need connection and support, that relying on others and having others rely on us is natural and healthy. The difference is that interdependence involves two or more whole people choosing to share their lives while maintaining their individual identities, boundaries, and autonomy. It's about want rather than need, choice rather than compulsion, mutual support rather than one sided sacrifice. Building healthy relationships after recovering from codependency might feel like learning to walk again. You might not trust yourself to recognize healthy dynamics, might fear falling back into old patterns, might struggle to believe that anyone would want to be with you if you're not constantly giving. These fears are understandable, even expected. Recovery doesn't mean you'll never have codependent thoughts or impulses. It means you'll recognize them and have choices about how to respond. The role of forgiveness in recovery, both forgiving others and yourself, cannot be overstated. Forgiveness doesn't mean condoning harmful behavior or pretending the past didn't happen. It means releasing the grip of resentment and blame that keeps you trapped in old patterns. Forgiving parents who couldn't provide what you needed, partners who took advantage of your giving nature, and especially yourself for the ways codependency has affected your life, creates space for something new to grow. Preventing codependency in future relationships involves vigilance without hypervigilance, awareness without anxiety. It means recognizing red flags in others and yourself while not becoming so guarded that genuine intimacy becomes impossible. It involves regular check ins with yourself. Am I maintaining my own identity in this relationship? Are my needs being considered and met? Am I taking responsibility for my own emotions and allowing others to take responsibility for theirs? These aren't one time questions, but ongoing practices that help maintain healthy relationships. The journey of recovery from codependency is ultimately about reclaiming your life, not from others, but for yourself. It's about recognizing that you have inherent worth that isn't dependent on what you do for others, that your needs and feelings are legitimate and important, that you have the right to take up space in the world as your authentic self. This isn't selfish or uncaring, it's the foundation of genuine love and connection. You cannot truly love others from a place of depletion and resentment. You cannot offer authentic support when you're drowning yourself. You cannot build healthy relationships when you don't exist as a whole person within them. Recovery is also about recognizing that the qualities that made you vulnerable to codependency, your empathy, your sensitivity, your desire to help and connect, aren't flaws to be eliminated, but gifts to be balanced. The goal isn't to become someone who doesn't care about others, but someone who can care without losing themselves. It's not about never helping, but about helping from choice rather than compulsion. It's not about having no emotions, but about recognizing which emotions are yours to feel and which belong to others. The ongoing nature of recovery from codependency needs to be acknowledged and normalized. This isn't something you fix once and never think about again. Like any deeply ingrained pattern, codependent tendencies can resurface during times of stress, transition, or vulnerability, a new relationship, a family crisis, a job loss. These challenges might activate old patterns, might make those familiar codependent behaviors look tempting again. This isn't failure, it's human. What matters is recognizing what's happening and having tools and support to navigate it differently. Celebrating success in recovery involves redefining what success means. In codependency, success might have meant keeping everyone happy, preventing all problems, being indispensable. In recovery, success might mean tolerating someone's disappointment without immediately trying to fix it, spending an evening on your own interests without guilt, having a disagreement without catastrophizing. These might seem like small victories to someone who's never struggled with codependency, but for someone in recovery, they're profound achievements worthy of recognition and celebration. The ripple effects of recovery extend far beyond the individual. When you heal from codependency, you change the dynamics of all your relationships. You model healthy boundaries for others, especially children who might be learning what relationships look like. You stop enabling dysfunction, which might motivate others to address their own issues. You become capable of genuine intimacy and mutual support, enriching the lives of those around you. Your recovery isn't just personal, it's a gift to everyone in your life. The concept of thriving beyond codependency invites us to imagine life not just without codependent patterns, but with genuine fulfillment, authentic relationships, and personal growth. Thriving might mean pursuing dreams that were impossible when all your energy went to managing others' lives. It might mean relationships that energize rather than exhaust you. It might mean a sense of peace and groundedness that comes from knowing who you are and what you value, independent of others' opinions or needs. The transformation from codependency to healthy relating is like emerging from a fog you didn't know you were in. Suddenly, you can see clearly your own needs, others' responsibilities, the difference between helping and enabling, the distinction between love and enmeshment. This clarity might be disorienting at first, might reveal that some relationships were built entirely on codependent dynamics and can't survive without them. This loss is real and deserves to be grieved, but it also creates space for relationships that can truly nourish and support you. As we understand more about codependency through research and clinical practice, we're learning that it's not a fixed condition, but a changeable pattern, not a personality flaw, but an adaptation to circumstances, not a life sentence, but a starting point for growth. The increasing awareness and destigmatization of mental health challenges means that more people are recognizing codependent patterns and seeking help. The resources available, books, support groups, therapy, online communities, provide multiple pathways to recovery, acknowledging that different approaches work for different people. The intersection of codependency with other mental health challenges adds layers of complexity to both understanding and recovery. Depression might make it harder to believe you deserve better than codependent relationships. Anxiety might make the thought of setting boundaries feel catastrophically dangerous. ADHD might make it harder to maintain the consistent practices that support recovery. Recognizing these intersections isn't about making excuses, but about understanding the full picture and adapting recovery strategies accordingly. Cultural factors also influence how codependency manifests and how recovery proceeds. Different cultures have different norms around family obligation, individual versus collective identity, and emotional expression. What might be considered codependent in one cultural context might be normal or even valued in another. Recovery doesn't mean abandoning cultural values, but finding ways to honor them while also maintaining personal boundaries and well being. This might involve challenging family expectations, reimagining cultural roles, or finding new ways to express cultural values that don't require self abandonment. The gendered aspects of codependency deserve attention as well. While anyone can develop codependent patterns, they often manifest differently and are perceived differently based on gender. Women might be more likely to be socialized into caretaking roles, making codependent patterns seem natural or even virtuous. Men might express codependency through controlling behaviors or workaholism, patterns that might not be recognized as codependency at all. Recovery involves challenging not just personal patterns, but also societal expectations about gender and relationships. The economic realities of codependency and recovery also matter. Therapy costs money. Taking time for self care requires resources. Leaving a codependent relationship might mean financial instability. These practical considerations can't be ignored or minimized. Recovery might need to be creative, utilizing free or low cost resources, building support networks that don't require payment, finding ways to create small changes within existing constraints. The perfect recovery with unlimited resources might not be possible, but meaningful change can happen even within limitations. Looking at codependency through a trauma informed lens helps us understand it not as a personal failing, but as an adaptive response to difficult circumstances. This perspective brings compassion to the recovery process, recognizing that codependent patterns developed for good reasons and served important functions. The goal isn't to judge or shame these adaptations, but to recognize that they're no longer needed or helpful, that new circumstances allow for new responses. This trauma informed approach also recognizes that recovery might involve processing traumatic experiences, that healing from codependency might be part of a larger healing journey. The neurobiological aspects of codependency and recovery remind us that we're not just changing thoughts and behaviors, but literally rewiring our brains and nervous systems. The practices that support recovery, mindfulness, boundary setting, self care, aren't just psychological interventions, but neurobiological ones. They're creating new neural pathways, calming overactive threat detection systems, strengthening areas of the brain involved in self regulation and self awareness. This rewiring takes time and repetition, which is why recovery is a process rather than an event. The role of creativity and play in recovery from codependency might seem frivolous, but is actually profound. Codependency often develops in environments where there's little room for play, where children have to be serious and responsible beyond their years. Reclaiming the ability to play, to create without purpose, to enjoy without productivity is part of reclaiming the self that got lost in codependency. This might mean taking an art class, learning to dance, playing games, or any activity that's purely for joy rather than function. The spiritual dimensions of recovery, whether religious or secular, provide another layer of support and meaning. This might involve finding purpose beyond individual relationships, connecting to something larger than personal struggles, or developing practices that nurture the soul as well as the mind and body. For some, this might mean returning to religious traditions. For others, it might mean meditation, nature connection, or service to causes they care about. The spiritual aspect of recovery isn't about following any particular path, but about finding sources of meaning and connection that transcend codependent dynamics. As we look at the full picture of codependency, its origins, manifestations, and the path to recovery, we see that it's both simpler and more complex than it might first appear. Simple in that it ultimately comes down to the relationship between self and other, between giving and receiving, between connection and autonomy. Complex in that it involves every aspect of human experience: psychological, biological, social, cultural, spiritual. Recovery isn't just about stopping certain behaviors, but about fundamentally reimagining what it means to be in relationship with ourselves and others. The hope that underlies any discussion of codependency is that change is possible. Not easy, not quick, not without setbacks and struggles, but possible. People do recover from codependency. They do build healthy relationships. They do reclaim their lives and discover who they are beyond their roles as caretakers and pleasers. They learn to love without losing themselves, to help without harming themselves, to connect without becoming consumed. This transformation isn't a miracle or magic. It's the result of courage, persistence, support, and the gradual accumulation of small changes that eventually add up to a different life. The journey from codependency to healthy relating is ultimately a journey home to yourself. It's about returning to, or perhaps discovering for the first time, the self that exists independent of others' needs and expectations. This self might have been buried so long that you don't recognize it at first, might seem foreign or even frightening. But as you spend time with this authentic self, as you learn its preferences and honor its needs, as you protect it with boundaries and nurture it with care, it becomes stronger and clearer. You remember or discover who you are when you're not performing, pleasing, or proving your worth through sacrifice. This rediscovery of self doesn't mean isolation or selfishness. In fact, it's only when we have a solid sense of self that we can truly connect with others. When we're not desperately trying to earn love through codependent behaviors, we can offer love freely. When we're not consumed with managing others' emotions, we can be genuinely present with them. When we're not losing ourselves in relationships, we can bring our whole selves to them. The paradox of recovery from codependency is that by focusing on ourselves, we become capable of healthier, more authentic relationships with others. The ongoing nature of growth beyond codependency means that recovery isn't a destination but a way of traveling through life. It's about developing practices and perspectives that support healthy relating, recognizing that these will need to be adjusted and renewed throughout life. Different life stages, relationships, and challenges will require different applications of recovery principles. What works in your 20s might need modification in your 40s. What helps in romantic relationships might be different from what helps with family or work relationships. Recovery is dynamic, responsive, alive. As we conclude this exploration of codependency, it's important to acknowledge both the pain it causes and the possibilities that exist beyond it. If you recognize yourself in these patterns, if you see your relationships reflected in these dynamics, know that recognition is the first step toward change. You're not broken or bad for having developed codependent patterns. You adapted to your circumstances in the best way you knew how. Now, with awareness, support, and tools, you can adapt differently. You can learn new ways of relating that honor both yourself and others. You can build a life that's truly yours while remaining connected to those you love. The message at the heart of understanding codependency is one of hope and empowerment. Yes, these patterns run deep. Yes, change is challenging. Yes, recovery involves discomfort and uncertainty. But yes, it's also possible to heal, to grow, to transform codependent patterns into healthy relating. Thousands of people have walked this path before you, are walking it alongside you, will walk it after you. You're not alone in this struggle, and you don't have to remain trapped in these patterns. Freedom from codependency isn't just possible, it's waiting for you to claim it. Recovery begins with a single step, a single moment of choosing differently. Maybe it's recognizing a codependent thought without immediately acting on it. Maybe it's saying no to one small request. Maybe it's spending an hour on something you enjoy without guilt. Maybe it's reaching out for support. These might seem like tiny, insignificant acts in the face of patterns that have shaped your entire life, but they're not. They're revolutionary. They're evidence that change is possible. They're the beginning of reclaiming your life from codependency and building something new in its place. The life that exists beyond codependency isn't perfect or problem free. You'll still face challenges, still have conflicts, still sometimes struggle with old patterns, but you'll face these experiences as yourself, not as a reflection of others' needs. You'll have tools to navigate difficulties without losing yourself in them. You'll know that your worth isn't dependent on being needed, that love doesn't require self sacrifice, that you have the right to exist as a whole person with needs, boundaries, and dreams of your own. This knowledge, embodied and lived rather than just understood intellectually, changes everything. Remember that recovering from codependency isn't about becoming someone new, but about uncovering who you've always been beneath the adaptations and survival strategies. It's about giving yourself permission to matter, to take up space, to have needs and preferences and boundaries. It's about learning that love, real love, doesn't require you to disappear, but invites you to show up fully. It's about discovering that you can care for others without carrying them, support others without sacrificing yourself, love others without losing yourself. The path forward might not be clear, might not be easy, but it exists. Others have walked it and found freedom on the other side. Support is available through therapy, support groups, books, online resources, and communities of others in recovery. You don't have to figure this out alone. Don't have to be perfect in your recovery. Don't have to have all the answers before you begin. All you need is the willingness to consider that things could be different, that you deserve more than codependency offers, that a healthier way of relating is possible. Your story doesn't have to end with codependency. It can continue into recovery, into growth, into a life where you exist as a whole person in relationships with other whole people. where love is freely given and received rather than desperately earned and anxiously maintained, where you can be yourself without apology or explanation, where your needs matter as much as anyone else's, where boundaries protect rather than isolate, where interdependence replaces codependence. This isn't just a dream or fantasy, it's an achievable reality that begins with recognizing that you deserve to heal and grow beyond the limitations of codependency. The conversation about codependency continues to evolve as we understand more about human psychology, relationships, and healing. What we know now is so much more than what we knew when the term was first coined, and what we'll know in the future will undoubtedly expand further. But what remains constant is the human capacity for growth and change, the possibility of healing even deep wounds, and the hope that exists for anyone struggling with codependent patterns. Your struggle is real, valid, and deserving of attention and care. Your recovery is possible, valuable, and worth the effort it requires. Your life beyond codependency is waiting for you to create it, one choice, one boundary, one act of self care at a time. As we wrap up today's deep dive into codependency, I want to leave you with this thought. Recognizing codependent patterns in your life isn't a sign of weakness or failure. It's the beginning of one of the most courageous journeys you can take. The path from codependency to healthy relating isn't always easy, but it's one of the most worthwhile transformations you can experience. If you heard yourself in today's conversation, if you recognized your relationships in these patterns, know that you're not alone and change is absolutely possible. Recovery starts with small steps. Maybe it's pausing before automatically saying yes, spending an hour on something you enjoy, or reaching out for professional support. Whatever your first step is, take it knowing that thousands of others have walked this path before you and found freedom on the other side. Thank you for joining me on Strides to Solutions. If today's episode resonated with you, please share it with someone who might benefit from this conversation. Remember, healing happens in community, and sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the knowledge that their struggle has a name and a solution. Until next time, I'm Esther Adams, reminding you that every stride forward, no matter how small, is a stride toward the life you deserve. Take care of yourselves, and remember, you matter, your needs matter, and your journey to wholeness matters.